Hello and welcome to our presentation for Elementary English Language Arts. My name is Melinda Clifford. I'm the coordinator for the elementary and secondary ELA programs, and I work with my colleague Dawn Uniat.
Hi, I'm Dawn Uniat. I'm a teacher on loan of service working with Melinda on the ELA team.
So today we're going to begin by going over some of the highlights of 3 important ministry documents. We'll start by looking at the English Language Arts section of the Quebec Education Program, which is our curriculum. And then 2 complementary documents that support the QEP, the Progression of Learning and the Framework for the Evaluation of Learning. We do use a lot of abbreviations and acronyms. So just to clarify, you'll often hear people talk about ELA in the QEP, so English Language Arts in the Quebec Education Program, as well as the POL, for the Progression of Learning, but as yet there's no abbreviation for the Framework for the Evaluation of Learning. The documents that we'll be looking at today are easy to find from the MEQ homepage. Go to School Network, Programs of Study, and follow the links Elementary, Languages, ELA. You can also scan the QR code on the screen and bookmark it for easy reference on your tablet or phone. So on this page, you'll find links to the program, the Progression of Learning, and the Framework for the Evaluation of Learning. Under that, you'll see resources. You can click on 2 documents. The first one is the Learning to be Prioritised for the 2021-2022 school year in the context of the current pandemic. And the second link is to a placemat that will provide you with an overview of the essential learning for elementary. There are also some additional links below that for LCEQ, Learn, Literacy Today, Quebec Reading Connection, and ATEC, the Association of Teachers of English of Quebec. So this is the ELA section of the QEP. To provide you with just another common acronym, ELA stands for Elementary English Language Arts. The first page of the program looks like this, and it's important to mention that it's a literacy program. And we'd like for you to take a moment just to consider what it means to you that it's a literacy program. So let's take a look at this word cloud and compare the ideas that you've had when you were thinking about the literacy program. So noted Brazilian educator Paulo Freire described literacy as knowing how to read the world and the word. Reading the world and the word includes all of the different ways we communicate using all types of literacy to make sense of our world. A literacy program is much more than a language program that teaches vocabulary and grammar. It's helping students make sense of their world and understand the social purposes of language, communicating feelings, ideas, knowledge, making judgments, asking questions, articulating thoughts, and respecting the ideas of others. So to quote briefly from the program, if we want our students to develop literacy in a world of rapid social, cultural, and technological change, we need to take the time to connect learning about language to the worlds of the students we teach, including those children with special needs, so that they understand language learning as the development of a repertoire of essential strategies, processes, skills, and knowledge that will make it possible for them to learn throughout their lives. So we're talking about lifelong learning. In a nutshell, as you can see on the screen, the goal of the ELA program is to provide opportunities for our students to experience the power of language as a way of making sense of their experience, to develop language competencies in diverse situations, and to develop fluent readers and communicators, so written, spoken, and other. Now I'm going to pass it over to you, Dawn, to take us into the program.
All right, in our elementary ELA program, we have 4 competencies, 4 areas of learning. And the competencies are reading and listening to literary, popular, and information-based texts, writing self-expressive, narrative, and information-based texts, representing literacy in different media, and using language to communicate and to learn, the top competency. The 4 competencies are all interconnected. Talk is an essential part of reading and writing and viewing and producing media. Readers write and writers read. Media texts are read and produced, and that's why we often refer to ELA as an integrated program. We teach the components together and assess them together, and they all work in synergy. And I'll show you an example on the next slide. Let's say you ask your students to produce a nonfiction text, maybe a descriptive report. This sounds like a writing or media production task, but the planning stages will require talking, like brainstorming. Students will have to read and maybe view to see examples of the text type and to understand how it's constructed and how it works. And they'll need to learn what are the characteristics of a descriptive report, and they'll also need to view and gather information on the topic that they're presenting. So this will be accompanied by more discussion, talking to learn about the topic. And in the writing or production process, there will be more talk, for example, asking for feedback from peers and the teacher, and even more talk if they are collaborating with others. And when the report is completed, it might be explained to the class or to the teacher, or even presented orally in its entirety. And then reflection on the task. That could be done through talk or in writing, and feedback from peers or teacher would often involve talk, and sometimes reading if the student receives written feedback. So let's look at the talk competency in more detail. And we're going to start by showing you a short video that introduces the highlights of the talk competency.
Talk in the classroom using language to communicate and to learn has two components: learning to talk and talking to learn. Learning to talk means that students acquire the Rsc skills needed for high-quality talk. In the classroom, this might include establishing norms and guidelines with your students. For example, be an active listener. Take turns. Ask questions to encourage others to participate. And be polite when you disagree. Students also need to learn conversation skills, like how to initiate a discussion, build on ideas, ask for clarification, question, challenge ideas, and synthesize. One way to do this is to work with sentence stems and give students examples of what to say. Sentence stems can help students structure what they want to say and contribute to a conversation. They can also provide shyer students with a scaffold to help them get started. To begin a discussion, students might say, "I'd like to start by saying," or "I think." To challenge an idea, they might say something like, "I disagree because," or "I understand your point, but have you thought about?" To clarify, they might ask, "Does that mean?" or "So are you saying?" Sentence stems scaffold talk and can be tailored to the specific needs of the discussion. Other classroom examples of learning to talk include adapting strategies and approaches to a discussion depending on the context. For example, talking in a think, pair, share situation versus participating in a Socratic circle. Discussing vocabulary and word choice. Examining forums, for example, debate or news reports, and exploring their codes and conventions and their affordances. When students are talking to learn, they might be exploring a talking point and putting forward a point of view. They might question other points of view that are presented or ask for clarification, and they should learn how to listen and respond respectfully, just like in any other talk context. Talking to learn in the context of a literature circle discussion can allow opportunities for students to summarize, make connections, and synthesize, examine and compare a variety of ideas, and support their viewpoints as they construct meaning. When students follow an inquiry process, they use talk to collect and share information, to identify issues and adopt a stance, as well as consider how best to communicate information and ideas in light of their purpose and audience. When students are talking to learn, they need many opportunities to use talk in meaningful ways so they can engage with content, build on their existing knowledge, make meaning, deepen their understanding, solve problems, figure things out, and construct a worldview. Rse is at the crux of learning to talk and talking to learn. It's that optimal point where the two converge through purposeful Rse tasks that engage students and support learning. Purposeful Rse tasks are carefully planned and explicitly taught. They structure and scaffold learning. They support social interaction and collaboration, for example, in the inquiry process and action research. And they encourage reflection and self-evaluation. Both learning to talk and talking to learn require students to listen actively and critically. So not only do students need to learn how to talk, but they also need to learn how to listen. For more information about talk in the ELA classroom, please visit literacytoday.ca.
You probably noticed that the term Rse was used in the video. It's a term that was coined in 1965 in an effort to raise the status of talk, so it would be seen as equal in importance to reading and writing. And we've been using the word Rse for a couple of years now in our projects and our presentations. The graphic that you see here was inspired by a nonprofit organization called Voice 21, and they're doing some amazing work in the United Kingdom to support schools and teachers in promoting talk, or Rse. So we tweaked the graphic to reflect the language in our program, Learning to Talk and Talking to Learn. Also important to note, Rse talk and speaking might all be used interchangeably, and they all encompass listening. And another point, in our ELA programs, learning to talk is done in context, in authentic situations, and at the same time as students are talking to learn. For each competency in the QEP, there are key features like subheadings, and they add more detail and help to flesh out the competency. So for the talk competency, students are using language to communicate information, experiences, and point of view, using language for learning and thinking, applying their knowledge of linguistic structures and features, interacting in collaborative group activities in a variety of roles, and self-evaluating their language development. Each of the competencies requires specific tools, knowledges, skills, and abilities that are like pieces of a puzzle that are put together and used to perform complex tasks, such as reading and making meaning in authentic and practical ways. And this is spelled out in the essential knowledges sections of the program. The key features provide the foundation for the essential knowledges that are described in the program. For the talk competency, the essential knowledges fall under these categories: language to communicate, talk for thinking and learning, linguistic structures and features, collaborative group activities, and self-evaluation. So basically, they're the same as the key features. Here's an example to illustrate. This example is from the section of the essential knowledges that addresses language to communicate. You'll see at the top of the page, this section refers to participation in collaborative storytelling activities to communicate experiences and responses. And just below, you can see that retelling of familiar stories and playing with language are done in cycles 1, 2, and 3. More advanced tasks, like creating plots, characters, and situations, and the invention of dialogue, come later in cycles 2 and 3. And finally, the linking of several stories together usually comes along in cycle 3. The QEP also gives us a portrait of what to expect at the end of each cycle. This is for talk in cycle 2, and now I'm going to ask you to pause here and read the text on the left side of the slide. Think about the questions on the right side as you read. Now, as you read, you might have noticed that students use language in many ways for a variety of purposes and in different contexts. There is a lot of interaction with others, and this includes listening to different points of view. Also important, the idea of using a portfolio and collecting many and varied pieces of evidence of learning over time. And finally, an essential part of the QEP, students are reflecting and self-evaluating. The second document that we're going to look at is the progression of learning. It's a document that complements the QEP, provides information about some of the program requirements, and it can be a great planning tool as it maps out a continuum of literacy learning. The progression has 3 sections: conventions of written and media language, so things like grammar, syntax, mechanics like spelling and punctuation. Then we have language learning processes. This is what we do as readers, writers, viewers, and producers of media, so it includes response, writing, and production of texts. In the last section, we have text types and their structures and features. Structures and features describe the organization and special features that are particular to certain text types. For example, a letter has a salutation, body, and closing, and that's different from a fairy tale It often begins with once upon a time and tells a story with a beginning, middle, and end, often ending with they all lived happily ever after. It's a story with a problem and a solution, and usually a nasty villain. And that's not at all like a descriptive report that will include facts and information and probably have headings and subheadings, and maybe we'll have a table of contents. All of the text types have their special characteristics, and these are the required text types for the elementary program. We have self-expressive text types. That includes reflective texts, for example, journals, reflections on their own learning, and also poetry, letters, invitations, and greeting cards. We have narrative and literary text types. So those are stories told in any form, including traditional texts like fairy tales, children's and young adult literature, biographies and memoirs, graphic novels, comics, videos, anything that tells a story. And then we have information-based text types, which includes nonfiction books, articles, reports, web pages, and planning texts like lists and graphic organizers, and also persuasive texts like advertisements. Here's a sample page from the POL. The arrow on the left shows the explanation of how to read the chart. So where you see a small arrow, students are constructing knowledge with teacher guidance. The star indicates the students should apply that knowledge by the end of that school year. In the blue areas, the students are reinvesting knowledge, continuing to use it in new situations and contexts. The grade levels are indicated in the gray area. In this section about planning texts, in section A, speaking and listening, students understand the use of talk to compose a first draft of thoughts, ideas, and information. Students are working on this in grade 1, and by the end of grade 2, they should be able to apply that knowledge. And then as they move on to grade 3 and up, they are continuing to reinvest and use that knowledge in more and more complex situations. And the next point, students understand the use of talk to clarify the steps in a procedure or an organizational plan. This would begin in grade 2 with teacher guidance, and students would be working on that until the end of grade 4, at which time they should be able to apply that knowledge. And the last document that we're going to look at is the framework for the evaluation of learning. And you'll notice that talk, using language to communicate and to learn, is worth 33% of a student's ELA mark. And if we haven't already made it clear that talk is important, this is something else to convince you. Here we see the content from the progression of learning on the left and how it is linked to the evaluation criteria, which comes from the QEP, and you see that on the right. So this brings together all of the documents that we've been talking about, and when we're evaluating students, it can serve as a reminder of what exactly the program is asking us to teach. The expectations, what we are looking for as we evaluate, is made explicit in the appendix. The appendix takes the evaluation criteria from the QEP, in this example, communicating ideas, and identifies what this looks like in the classroom. So in this case, engagement in meaningful dialogue with peers and teachers, expression of ideas, points of view, and information, and the use of spoken communication when collaborating with peers. So I went through the POL and the framework fairly quickly because the first document we looked at, the QEP, is the curriculum. It's the most important document, and the progression and framework are complementary documents that can be very useful, but the QEP is the program, that's the curriculum. And here we have a brief summary of how the documents can work together. We start with the QEP and focus on program content, look at the key features and essential knowledges to identify the outcomes that you will focus on. For example, from the QEP in the talk competency, you might choose one of the key features, like using language to communicate information, experiences, and point of view. And then we consult the POL. What exactly do you want your students to be able to do? Maybe you have a small group of students working on a project together, and they will be using talk, speaking, and listening for planning. How exactly do you want your students to communicate within this small group? What makes for a productive planning session? Do they need to establish talk guidelines to ensure turn-taking and respectful interaction? And then we'll use the framework to determine if students have learned what you hoped they would learn. Are your students engaging in meaningful dialogue in a collaborative way? Are students using talk in the ways you taught them? Are they ready to continue in more complex contexts with different group members or in larger groups and with more difficult tasks? Or do we need to reteach, try again, give students more time to practice because they aren't quite there yet? And you can see this is a recursive process. And I think at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Melinda.
Okay. So before we go on with the next section, I would ask you to take a piece of paper on your own and jot down some ideas that you have for teaching talk in the classroom. In our work with the ELA community, the talk competency, which is using language to communicate and to learn, was identified as an area where teachers require support and resources. And during the work that we did in the preliminary stages of our research on talk, we came to realize a few fundamental points. I'd like to show you a quick Powtoon that we created that highlights a little bit of what we were seeing. Before I start the video, I'd remind you to just make note of what you do when you teach talk in the classroom. So how do you teach talk in your classroom? Like the beginning of the video said, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that providing opportunities that support talk equates to teaching talk. Many of the very experienced teachers and consultants that we worked with had aha moments when they realized that. Most of us had been making those same assumptions that we highlighted in the Powtoon. So last fall, we sent out a survey to elementary and secondary ELA teachers across the province in both private and public schools. We received over 300 responses, and of those responses, more than 3/4 of the teachers expressed the need for more tools to support both the teaching and assessment of talk. These numbers really corroborated what we suspected was a serious need for talk tools, and over the past year, we've been working very closely with consultants to create an Rse Skills Tool and developmental continua. We've chosen to focus a little more on the talk competency during this presentation, as we've been working on a number of tools, like I said, to support teachers, which we'd also like to share with you. So this is our new Rse Skills Tool. It illustrates all of the skills that students need to become proficient communicators. Rse is a new term that we've decided to use, so we've included a definition right here on the tool. Rse enables us to navigate our own learning and our world through the skills of talking and listening. You can see that there are 4 color-coded strands: physical, linguistic, cognitive, and social and emotional. All 4 strands are umbrellaed by the blue turquoise metacognitive strand, which is an important part of our ELA programs. The metacognitive strand prompts students to consider how they are developing as learners and thinkers through talk. We want to encourage them to reflect on their approaches, strategies, and skills, how they use their understanding of talk to grow as communicators and learners, and to recognize the value of their own contributions and their impact. So I won't go into too much depth here. We wanted to show you a close-up of one of the strands just to give you an idea of the skills that are being highlighted. And we have the social and emotional strand here that focuses on collaboration, which is what students are doing when they participate in group activities in a variety of ways. Interaction that is respectful and constructive. Students express empathy and develop positive and supportive attitudes towards their peers. Active listening. Students engage cognitively, which means that they may ask questions to clarify, challenge, or build on ideas. And they may engage physically also through eye contact and body language. So you can see that there's an overlap between the strands. The term active listening is in bold, which means that it can be found in an accompanying glossary. And finally, they demonstrate self-confidence. So you'll be able to access all of these tools on Literacy Today. The Rse Skills Tool is the foundational tool because it tells us what to teach. And here we have the developmental continuum of Rse skills, which shows us what the skills look like in action in the classroom. It's a planning and formative assessment tool that teachers can use to gauge the development of their students' proficiency as communicators. It describes a developmental progression. And I want to point out straight away that it is not a rubric that describes levels of achievement. So it's not linked to evaluation criteria, nor is it tied to a specific grade level or cycle. This means that it can be used at both elementary and secondary levels, with the complexity of the task or the context being the defining factor in the level of difficulty. So if we read across the top, you can see that the descriptions of the strands are there. You'll notice that the same language and colours carry over from the Rse skills into the continuum. The 4 strands are at the top and the progression of the skills begin at the bottom, and we move our way up from beginning through to developing, consolidating, and then extending. So what you're looking at here is a close-up of the consolidating level for each of the strands. And you can see that if we look at the social and emotional strand, which is the green one, just here, as a communicator at this level, one can listen actively by considering and responding to the feelings and ideas of others. They can read their audience and adapt their communication to connect with them, and they can contribute in an assured manner through constructive and positive interactions. We've also developed a student continuum. This one uses I statements to describe students' development. It's very similar to the teacher continuum, but you'll notice that each of the 4 strands are umbrellaed by this metacognitive strand. Metacognition, as I mentioned earlier, is thinking about our own development as learners through reflection and self-evaluation, and it's an essential part of the ELA programs. So this continuum is designed for students to use to help them reflect on their own skills as communicators. Again, it's designed to be used by all levels and is applicable to all talk situations. So exploratory talk, discussions, figuring things out, working out problems, as well as more formal presentational talk. This is a close-up of what the developing level of the student continuum looks like for each of the strands. And if I focus on the green section, which is the social and emotional strand, students practice social conventions in different talk situations to maintain respectful and productive interactions. I listen and respond constructively when talking with others, and I'm comfortable taking risks when expressing my ideas. The Rse tools were validated in 6 school boards and a private school last year, as well as by Bishop's University. They are available on the Literacy Today website. Since we've focused a lot on the talk competency today, we'd like to finish by sharing a video with you that shows what can happen when talk is taught explicitly. You'll need to use the QR code, or you can type the address into your browser and watch the video externally and then come back to the presentation. And if you have any questions or comments, you can contact us at info@literacytoday.ca.